Okay, we are doing general word problems today. So these are the catch-all category for word problems. Um, there will be kind of a variety in the examples I picked because the biggest skill for doing well with word problems is that you have to be able to translate your text into equations so you can calculate the desired information. So I gave us a couple of different examples so that we could practice doing it different ways. But we can go ahead and get started and see how you feel. If you have any questions as we go, feel free to drop them in the chat, and then I'll have some time at the end for general questions as well. So here is our first example. Okay. A farmer can produce 4 kilograms of wheat per day, and 1.5 kilograms of wheat is consumed daily. If the farmer will keep 200 kilograms of wheat to use as seed for the following season and sell the excess, what is the fewest number of days after which the farmer will have more than 100 kilograms of wheat to sell? So every day the farmer produces 4 kilograms but consumes 1.5. So the first thing we need to do is write out the net amount that they are consuming. And the second part is they need 200 next year for seed. And we are trying to look for the fewest number of days after which they will have more than 100 to sell. So I am going to calculate the break-even point at which they would have exactly 100 to sell. So net wheat per day is going to be 2.5, which is 4 minus 1.5, the part that they consume. And then in here would just be the number of days. And then 200 plus 100, 300 kilograms is our target amount of wheat to break even with this goal of selling 100 kilograms. Then we can just say, we can set our 300 kilogram target goal to 2.5 times in days. Divide 300 by 2.5 and say at 120 days we will break even, but we need to know what the fewest number of days after which the farmer will have more than 100 kilograms of wheat to sell. So we need at least one other day, and thus it would be 121. Any questions on that one? That one I think is not so mathematically complex, just having to figure out what equations you need and then remembering that you need that extra day in there is the main trick. Let's look at our next example. I think it's this one. Okay. If the product of the digits of a two-digit positive integer n is 8, what is the value of n? So if the product of the two digits is 8, then that means that there are only 4 choices. It can be 18, 1 times 8 is 8, 81, same deal, 24, 2 times 4 is 8, or 42, same deal. So what we need from one or both of these statements is to narrow down to one of these choices, because the question stem gives us a lot of restrictions, so it narrows down most two-digit numbers out of the consideration. So, statement 1, the sum of the units digit and the tens digit of n is 6. So if we add the digits together, they will be 6. We still have two choices. We still have 24 and 42 that satisfy this condition. So since we don't have a unique value, statement 1 alone is not sufficient. Statement 2, n divided by 6 is a prime number. So 18 divided by 6 is 3. And this one doesn't work, but 42 divided by 6 is 7. So we still have two options. So statement 2 alone is not sufficient. But if we triangulate with what we have learned from both statements, there is only one option that meets both of these criteria, which is 42. So the correct answer is C. Both statements together are sufficient, but neither statement alone is sufficient. Any questions on that one? Let's look at our next choice. Okay. Mark, a real estate investor, purchased two houses in 2019 for a total of $530,000. After 1 year, he sold one of the houses for a profit of 10% and the other house for a profit of 8%. If the total profit he earned from the two houses is $47,000, what is the difference between the initial purchase price of the two houses? So let's start here. Our purchase is X plus Y. That's our initial purchase price of house one and house two is $530,000. And the profit is X over 10 because 10% on that one, and 2Y over 25 because 8% on that one is $47,000. We're going to multiply this whole equation by 50, which is the least common multiple of 10 and 25, just to get those fractions out of the way. So then we get 5x plus 4y equals 23, 2,350,000. So we have an equation for x and y up here that we can use to isolate one of the variables and plug it in, which is what we will do next. So if we plug in for y, 530,000 minus x, we can get 5x plus 4 times 530,000 minus x equals this 2.35 million. And then we can simplify down and get that x equals 230,000. But we still know that x plus y, the original purchase prices, equals 530,000. So that means the other house must be 300,000. And since we are looking for the difference between the initial purchase price of the two houses, then we can just say y, the bigger one, minus x, is 300,000 minus 230,000 is 70,000. So our best answer is E. Any questions on that one? I know it was kind of a complex one. Okay. How do we get the profit equation? So the profit equation is this part. After 1 year, he sold one of the houses for a profit of 10%, which I have done as x. X divided by 10 would be 10% of x, so the profit for x, and the other house for a profit of 8%. So that is simplified. It would be 8y over 100, but I simplified it down to 2y over 25 to make it a little more manageable. So this is our profit for house X, this is our profit for house Y, and we know that if we add them together, the total profit was $47,000. This is probably a hard question. I'm pretty sure it is a hard question because it's several steps. And also because you have to remember to do the difference between the two houses. Any other questions? No calculator on this section. Yes, you have to do all of this manually. You only get a calculator on data insights. Okay. Let's look at our last example here. Please. They do provide a calculator for DI. That's part of the like price. It's a little bit awkward to me because I'm used to using a 10 key, which is like the number pad on the side of your computer, and it doesn't work super great with the 10 key, not as well as, say, the calculator on your laptop. So just practice a little bit with it because it's a little bit awkward on the exam, in my opinion. Cam and Francesca were each paid $D to paint a fence. To complete the job, Cam worked for 12 hours and Francesca worked for 1/6 fewer hours than Cam worked, so 10 hours. After the job was completed, Francesca gave Cam $S, after which they had each earned the same amount per hour. In terms of S, what was the total amount that Cam and Francesca were paid to paint the fence? The first thing we need to do is figure out their hours and their hourly rates. So Cam earned D plus S hours because Francesca gave S to Cam, and Francesca earned D minus S. And Cam's hourly rate, because she worked for 12 hours, is D plus S over 12. Francesca's hourly rate, because she only worked 10 hours, is D minus S over 10. So these are equal because after which they had earned the same amount per hour. So these two hourly rates are equal to each other. So we can set them equal to each other, cross multiply, and get 12D minus 12S equals 10D plus 10S. So 2D equals 22S, and D equals 11S. But they were both paid D. So each of them got D. Since they were each paid D, they were paid 2D total dollars, or 22 US in total, which is choice D. Any questions on this one or anything else? This one would also be considered hard. I think particularly, so one of the things that differentiates a medium and hard question is how intuitive the answer choice is. So here you solve down for this D equals 11S, but then you have to re-multiply it by 2 to get their total amount because they both get D dollars. So I would say this one is hard. Whereas if it did not have this, if you were just solving for D in terms of S, it might be a medium question because it has this extra step that's easy to forget about that makes it a hard question. Mm, Could I go into a bit more detail? Hold on how I derived the equations. So Cam and Francesca were paid D to paint a fence. To complete the job, Cam worked for 12 hours and Francesca worked for 1/6 fewer hours than Cam worked. So after the job was completed, Francesca gave Cam S. Here, that is the point at which I know that they both start with D, but there's a trade. Cam or Francesca gives Cam S. So that is how I'm setting up these two equations, after which they had each earned the same amount per hour. So I had just read through it and I didn't really do the math on it, but Cam worked for 12 hours and Francesca worked for 1/6 fewer hours. So that's how I know that Francesca worked for 10 hours because that is 1/6 less than 12. Um, and then because I know that these things are set equal, I know I need to make an equation for them in order to set them equal to each other. Then I'm solving in terms of S. So that is how I got those equations. Does that make more sense? And as far as the thought process, oh, I think these are actually related. Do I translate the English into math linearly, sentence by sentence as I read, or do I read the whole problem first to see the big picture before writing a single equation? So I translate it sentence by sentence, but sometimes that's how I prefer to do it. The downside of doing it that way is that sometimes I write equations that are like not set up necessarily for the most efficient solution up front, and I have to flip things around. The upside of doing it linearly is that I don't forget part of what's going on because I went sentence by sentence. So that is my solution. Some people do like to read the whole problem, but I feel like I'm more prone to forget something important if I don't go sentence by sentence and do the equations. Any other questions? And we can do general, or if you want to look at any of the examples again, I can go back and show them. You have a few minutes to hang out and answer general questions as well. Here are these results. Any strategies for building equations and word problems? I think the best strategy is to practice kind of a mix of word problems and get used to writing things out, because the more you get in the habit of translating the words into equations, the more you will see the sort of mistakes that you personally are prone to make so that you can know not to do it that way. But doing a mix, so for instance, this is a type of question that comes up a lot. Someone gives someone else some money, so then they have the same wage or something like that. You get wages that are either equal, or wages in terms of Francesca's wage in terms of Cam's wage. So this is one that I have quite a bit of practice with. The more word problems you do, the more you can see the kinds that come up over and over again, and the more you can just practice doing that English to math translation. What was my quant score during my first mock? I want to say it was like an 81. I would have to look to be sure, but I think it was like an 81. Do I have any specific tips for word problems? Again, just the practicing and practicing translating, and then always look at how they are solved so that you can compare how you translated the words into an equation versus how the guide, for instance, translated it, or how other people in the forum translated it. Do I feel there are a lot of repeat questions? For example, the one we just did could be replicated so you could start to learn the types. There are a lot of repeat questions. And even if there aren't, some of them are kind of modular. So for instance, let's see here. This one about the profit on sales. This one is a little bit less common because you're looking for the difference between the initial purchase price of the two houses. But as far as like calculating some interest or calculating a profit on something and comparing it to some other number, very common. So I would say they fall into general categories. Someone will be rate of return or interest, people's relative salary, how much a group of people spent on something. There are borderline infinity questions with each of those themes. How many times did I take the GMAT? One. How long did I study for them total? Estimate of hours, I would say about 550 total hours, and months total, 9 to 10 months. What helped me the most? Taking a lot of notes and then reviewing my notes, which is what I usually mention in these as well, is if you go through and you write everything down, then if you make a mistake, you can go back to see your notes and compare how you did it versus the official explanation, or see exactly where you went wrong, and then you can just make a note, hey, this is something I tend to do. For instance, I tended to miss little things. For instance, in this question, the thing about getting their total pay instead of just doing S, that's something that I tend to miss. So now, as a general rule, I read the question stem again before I submit my answer just to make sure that I'm answering what it's asking. But I'm a big fan of taking a lot of notes so that you can audit your performance and not what you think your performance was. If you do a lot of stuff in your head, then you may think that you understood something, but that's just your memory playing tricks on you. Whereas if you write it down, you know exactly how well you understood it because you have receipts. And how did TDP help me get to Q90? Just going through the lessons. I did the study plan, I did all the lessons, and kind of learning all the different things and a lot of practice. That's what helped me get to Q90. That's what helped me get to all three sections 90. It's mostly practice and being very investigative about the sort of mistakes you make. Because the more you can narrow down why you're making mistakes, the better you can avoid those mistakes in the future. Overall, how many questions and marks, all sections put together, did I take for the perfect score? Overall, how many questions did I take? I have no idea. Like maybe thousands of questions. How many marks did I take? I did take all 6 months. Did I use a notebook for my notes or did you do it online somehow? I use a notebook for my notes. I actually use like a reusable notebook because I felt bad about how much paper I was going through. And so I got just a reusable notebook. And that's what I prefer. I don't like to do, especially my quant notes on the computer. Typing out equations is so tedious to me that I cannot do it. It it is frustrating to the point that it makes me want to not practice. So I'm more of a pen and paper person. But some people do like to do their notes on the computer. I think it's a lot easier for verbal than it is for quant. So you can also do a mix. I've been using online notes. Yeah, but it's hard to copy equations. No kidding. And then the written notes are a bit hard to organize. So here's my tip on written notes. And I also do this because I use a reusable notebook. So it only has whatever, like 20 pages. And then I have to wipe it clean. I don't have just backlogs of notes. I think that if you try to keep backlogs of notes, you might tell yourself that you will review those, but you are not going to do that. So my biggest tip is do your notes for a practice set and then review your notes immediately and any takeaways that you need, put those in a digital form. So you can do it in an error tracker. I use the TTP one, but I also used some spreadsheet stuff for things that weren't on the TTP error tracker or things that I was phrasing in like a particular way, that I was phrasing more as to how I felt about the error, that it was hard to articulate. So I was like, oh, I do this thing. This is how I describe it. And then I would just keep a record of I did it this many times on this type of problem. So on this type of problem, be aware that I'm prone to do this. But yeah, if you're going to do pen and paper notes, which I think is great for quant, then don't assume that you will ever look back at them even like 2 or 3 days later. Just copy down the pertinent information and then throw them away or start over. Is there a different is there a different approach to word problems in quant versus word problems in DI? That's There's not necessarily a different approach to word problems in quant. I would say that word problems in quant are very word focused, and word problems in DI are more likely to have some other information. They're more likely to have some visuals or something. But if you're comparing word problem to word problem, like a pure text to DI, so like technically, I mean, this is a DI problem. And it's also not so mathematical. It's more what I would call a puzzle type problem. So yeah, you have to know what product sums and prime numbers are, but there's not a lot of calculation involved. It's more of like fitting the pieces of a puzzle together. But with this one versus a quant problem, there's not really that much different. If there's graphs and stuff, obviously folding that in makes it a little bit different, but mostly I would say they're pretty similar. Which format of test prep did you find the most effective? Which format? I mostly did just reading lessons to understand concepts and then practice problems. So I guess understanding concepts and practice problems were the test prep that I used the most. I didn't really, if you're asking as compared to like YouTube videos and stuff, that wasn't something I used that much. But I am more of a read and write things down person. I know a lot of students do like the YouTube videos, so if you prefer to do that, that's totally fine. But I was mostly a self-study person. Any tips on note taking? Did you use like a note taking app? Um, I mostly use my notebook and then like an Excel spreadsheet for some of it. For the real estate question, could you please explain again how you were able to simplify the profit to be x over 10 plus 2y over 25? So again, for this one, he made a profit of 10% on one of the houses, so that's the x over 10. If you took the total purchase price of the house and you divided it by 10, you would get 10% of the purchase price, and that was he made 10% profit. So he made 10% of the purchase price as profit on one of the houses, and then for the other house, he made 8y over 100. So 8 times the purchase price divided by 100 would be 8%, but because that isn't a simplified fraction, I simplified down the 8y over 100 to 2y over 25. Did I only use TTP for practice questions? Or did I rely on GMAT Club questions Manhattan for additional practice? I used TTP and OG only, and I did use GMAT Club a little bit at the end to review my mocks, but I did not use it so much during my learning phase. I just used it to look up solutions for the mocks because they don't really explain why the answers are what they are. So if it wasn't a mistake that I could clearly see, I would look on there to see if someone else had done step by step for me. But I mostly use the TTP, and then I use the set of practice questions you get from GMAC, and then the 6 mocks were the only other questions I did. I did not do an additional test prep software. That would have been so many practice questions, in my opinion. There was plenty here for me. Do I have a strict template I draw immediately, or do I organize data points as I read? I sort of organize the data points as I read because questions can also pivot. So just because one starts in some way, it might take a little bit of that type and then pivot into something else. So it's easier to just do, here's one data point and then move on to something else. And that way I can structure an overall idea at the end if I need to, but I don't get locked into a template that doesn't quite suit what I'm trying to do. What reusable notebook do you recommend? I have only used this one, the Rocketbook. The Rocketbook Fusion, which also has stuff with like a calendar on it. So I haven't used any other ones, but I will say that I like the pen writes well on it. It doesn't write in the way that I've heard some reusable notebooks write more like a dry erase marker on a board, and I don't think that I would like that. This very much writes like a pen on paper pretty much. So it does have that going for it. I do like it. I've had it for several years since I started doing test prep, so and it's going great. I'm using it in school. It's a pretty nice notebook. And how long did I study a day? I did study, basically every day. For usually 2 or 3 hours on weekdays and more like 4 hours on weekends for Saturday and Sunday. I did take some breaks in there, but I mostly did study every day. For someone who is a working professional, do you think it's better to do 1 hour every morning consistently or pile up 8 hours on weekends? How did I study? I think it's better to do some every day, because if you try to, for one, if you try to do all of your prep on the weekends, your weekends are going to not be enjoyable. And I think that that's really discouraging. An overlooked part of test prep to me is that you don't want to set up a system that is too ambitious because it can make you burn out and then you're not doing anything. But yeah, if I just studied for like 8 hours every weekend, I feel like I would have just given up because I'm tired on the weekends. Like I worked all week. And so it would be very easy to be like, well, not today. And then I didn't study any that week. I think it's much better to have like an hour or two during, you could do it during the morning or after work. I would also do sometimes like a little bit in the mornings and then some after work just to break it up to make it easier to get to 2 hours. Because 2 1 hour sessions was a little bit easier for me than one 3 hour session, and then a slightly longer uninterrupted session on the weekends. Any tips on how to organize your calculations during quant tests? What parts to write versus not write, or calcs to do in your head versus write down? So that's a good question, and here is my recommendation. Write everything down up front. You will get to a point where, okay, so you start out and you're like, I don't need to do all these calculations by hand. And you're probably like giving yourself a bit too much credit on that. So instead of listening to that, just write everything down. And then once you see that you can consistently do things correctly in your head for some types of calculations, then it's fine to skip over those. Like, for instance, for this, I know what 8% and 10% are, so I don't have to go through all of those steps because I'm pretty clear on it. But start by writing everything down so that you can make sure that you aren't thinking that you're doing things correctly or thinking through things one way and you really need to be doing them the other way, and it's easier to audit your work. And then after you have like consistently shown that you can do things reliably in your head, if you want to trim down your calculations, you'll do so from a more informed perspective. And that way you're not thinking that you're pretty good at stuff and then making mistakes and thinking the mistakes are something else, but really it's just that you keep doing some basic, easy to fix math thing wrong, that when you write it down, you'll do it correctly. But you will, as you do your notes get more efficient. But what is an efficient note for me is not going to be an efficient note for everyone else. So you kind of have to drill down to your efficient note system from the beginning and cut out what you're good at, and then your efficient notes will suit your skill set. In your mocks, did I hit a score plateau around 755? When that happens, is the fix usually more content review or more practice tests? How do you diagnose the root cause of a plateau? So in my mocks, I don't know that I hit a super bad score plateau because I just didn't have that many. I I had kind of steady progress. I don't know that I got the same score on 2 mocks, honestly, but I would spend a lot of time reviewing my mocks. I spent like several days reviewing each mock and going through and seeing exactly what the questions were, what I had done, like what I should do differently, saving the questions so that I could review them later and see if I could solve them correctly later. And I think that that is usually what happens when people hit a plateau, is that they don't look into all of the questions thoroughly enough, because it is a lot of work to review. And it's also just kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a hit to your self-esteem at first to look through things that you mess up and dissect them in detail to see exactly where you messed up. I know for me, perhaps I'm a bit sensitive, but that was a little bit sad sometimes. But I also noticed that it really helped me, and so it was worth doing the work. I think that students sometimes think to review their mocks, they just need to, read through them, look at the right answer and move on. And that's not going to teach you where you have gaps, the way that sitting with a question and looking through the forums, looking through different explanations, finding your favorite one, practicing the question again through different methods to see which way is like the easiest or the quickest for you that you'll probably remember next time. That is where you can really target weaknesses and improve them. Whereas if you just glance over things, you don't get that growth. And so I would say reviewing your mocks is probably the hardest part of test prep, but it is also probably one of the most valuable parts. I would say the most valuable part of test prep. For studying as a beginner in this process, where is the best place to start studying? Equations or doing the study plan or going section by section? Any thoughts? I I like to do the study plan, or I did the study plan because I didn't want to miss anything, and I had not covered a lot of this stuff in a long time, probably 10 plus years. So for me, I felt more confident just going through the study plan and refreshing on everything than I would have thinking, oh, I was fine at inequalities when I was 17, so I'm sure that's still true. So for me, I couldn't even tell you what I used to be pretty good at in quant versus not as good at. So I went ahead and worked through everything. But if you have more recent quant experience, you might have a more confident view of where your skills are. And so I won't say that my way is the best way for everyone, but if you are like me and you don't really remember what you ever did well at in quant, or it's been like a really long time, I recommend going through and looking at the the lessons on the topics first and then trying to apply what you learned to the equations, because just jumping into equations, you might be able to learn a lot of things, but there might be some basic stuff that you miss. And if you just read someone explain it once, you would have a better foundation. So I think that reading through the lessons, especially on quant, usually there's very little explanation that you have to read through. Just reading through those for each little topic and then trying to practice and apply those concepts gives you a pretty firm foundation. I'm about 2 months away from my GMAT, and I haven't taken a mock since I've only been following my TTP study plan. When did you recommend I start taking mocks? TTP tells you, do they tell you? Yes, it's usually at the end after you've done all the lessons that's when I started doing my mocks, and it's part of the study plan, and it also I think gives you a couple of days to review each mock. It doesn't make you take like one every day for a week. It's usually one or two a week and then some time to review. Did I use any AI or chatbot to prep? I didn't use any AI or chatbot to prep because it was a couple of years ago and it used to be worse. So when I was doing particularly my quant prep, um, I didn't really use any chatbot at all, but back then the chatbots used to they couldn't really do basic math reliably. They would do basic math wrong, and I think that they're quite a bit better than they used to be, but I did this so long ago from a technological standpoint that the chatbots were terrible. They are okay for some things now. I will say that CR they're not great at usually. Um, and I think it's just because they don't really understand a lot of logic, but they're way better for math than they used to be. Any other? Did I do quant and DI together? I did quant and data sufficiency together, and then I did DI sort of at the end. Or doing all of the quant and verbal because especially the verbal questions, rely a lot of times on multiple different types of CR. And so if you try to jump into DI too early, it's asking you stuff that you haven't even learned about. So it's a little bit counterintuitive. But with data sufficiency, a lot of times, also those questions used to just be part of the quant section. And so a lot of times they are mixed in with quant. And a lot of times they are also just on topics that are quant topics. So it's very easy to fold those in. Whereas the graphs and stuff, I would save that for the end. What is the best way to prepare for critical reasoning and reading comprehension? Again, I'm a big fan of taking a lot of notes, especially for critical reasoning. I think that there is a point with it. And people have different natural talents. Like some people, they grasp it super easily. Some people, I would say most people do not grasp particularly critical reasoning super easily. So there is a point that I think students have where there's just no way around taking really detailed notes to see what your thought process is because you will not remember when you're reviewing. But if you go through and you're like, I eliminated answer C for this reason, like, here's my argument breakdown. I eliminated C for this reason. And then you go and look at the notes and they're like, that's not a reason to eliminate C. Then you're like, oh, I incorrectly eliminated it. Or, oh, like I missed a keyword or I didn't read the whole answer choice. And then later you can be like, slow down, read the whole answer choice before you start eliminating anything. For reading comp, the best prep is just like practicing reading, in my opinion. The reading questions are, the passages are a little bit dense and it can be hard to focus on some of them in the time allotted. But if you just practice reading sort of dense material, you can get better at focusing on that sort of thing. And especially if you practice reading things that you aren't necessarily super interested in, I think that that's really helpful. And then once you can consistently focus on what you're reading, I will say that reading comp tends to get far easier because a lot of the passages, just due to the restrictions of the test and how they write questions, a lot of the passages kind of follow some templates. And so once you're decent at paying enough attention to get the main idea and to get the main structure, you'll notice that a lot of the structures are very similar. And after that, it's easier to do well on them. You just have to get over the initial barrier of focusing on the passages if they aren't that interesting to you. Thank you so much. Did I use LSAT for verbals? I did not use the LSAT, but I do know a lot of people do use the LSAT. The only thing I would say is that they ask a couple of different questions than CR does. So they have they have some extra stuff that they do, and CR is a bit more restrictive. So if you're going to use LSAT materials, which I believe there is quite a bit of them, so they are valuable for that. But just be careful on a couple of things that don't translate over. And you can probably just Google and see what they are. Like I know that they use different types of assumptions, but we only use one type of assumptions in GMAT. Like I think they use necessary assumptions and sufficient assumptions, and we only use necessary assumptions. And then there's like some extra logical flaw type things that GMAT doesn't really get into. But you can, and lots of students do use some LSAT practice questions for verbal. Can I give an example on an RC pattern? So one is like, it starts out and it says, hey, people believe this thing. Here's why they're wrong. And then the rest of the passage is just evidence as to why the people who believe that thing are wrong. And I think in the course it's called like a myth structure. Here's a myth and the explanation for why it isn't true. Another one is basically, here's someone's belief about something, here's someone else's different belief about that thing. And then at the end, the author may or may not have an opinion. You'll notice the other thing that's weird about these passages is that they're not supposed to be that long, and so sometimes they just cut off kind of abruptly. So it'll be like some guy's opinion, some other guy's opposite opinion, the end. And so they um they don't always have like authors' opinions in them, and you treat those passages a little differently. But that helps you reading them and seeing like, oh, is this does the author even take any side on any of this, or is it just like presents one opinion, presents a different opinion? That can help you solve a lot of questions. Um, what was my pre-exam day prep strategy? For like the last 2 weeks before my exam, after I scheduled it, I think I had maybe one more mock and then I reviewed it a bit. But I think I took most of the last 2 weeks to do very, very light studying and mostly just rest. And then that way I could go in relaxed. And I really recommend that. I know a lot of people do that if you try to study till the last minute, it can cause you more stress than any extra learning you get out of it. But if you rest and you try to go in at 100%, that can make a huge difference in your score that extra studying would not make up for. All right. If you're all set, then I will let you go. And I will probably not be back next week, but maybe the week after that, we will have a verbal session, depending on how much they think people will come because it's a holiday. But thank you so much. I will see you all soon.